Maroon Spirit 954. Today is November 11th, 2019. This is week 7 of the last fiscal quarter of 2019, the 400th year milestone, 1619 to 2019. Tonight's Dr. Carter G. Woodson quote states the following: "The Negro has been assigned to the lowest drudgery as the sphere in which the masses must toil to make a living. And socially and politically, the race has been generally proscribed. Inasmuch as the transducers of the race have settled the matter in this fashion, they naturally oppose any effort to change this status." Dr. Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. Tonight's Black Inventor, Mr. Thomas Elkins. Federal patent number 100020. February 22nd, 1870. Mr. Thomas Elkins invented the dining, the ironing table, and quilting frame. Mr. Thomas Elkins also invented federal patent number 122518, January 9th, 1872, the chamber commode. And lastly, federal patent number 221222, November 4th, 1879, the refrigerating apparatus. Tonight's definitions: school, any institution at which instruction is given in a particular discipline. The next definition: education, an enlightening experience. The next definition: American, noun, a native or citizen of the United States. Next, descendants, one who follows in the bloodline of an ancestor, either lineally or collaterally. Slavery, a situation in which one person has absolute power over the life, fortune, and liberty of another. Next, treaty, an agreement formally signed, ratified, or adhered to between two nations or sovereigns. Reparations, the act of making an amends for a wrong. The 12 steps of recovery for the American descendants of slavery are the following. Step 1. Learn about the estate or estates your family originated from. 2. Who established that estate? 3. What nation and confederacy had jurisdiction over that area prior to the European? 4. Ask all nonprofit organizations you attend what's your position on reparations. 5. They either support it or they don't. No support, no money. However, if they support it, then immediately children and adults need weekly classes free of charge about steps 1, 2, and 3, and field trips to ADOS landmarks in that city, county, and state. 6. Don't support European holidays for the remainder of the year. 7. Avoid spending money with any small business that doesn't hire your people. 8. All businesses need operating cash. Spend money with American black businesses. 9. All other groups rely on our energy and operating cash to survive. Set the trends of making other groups follow our lead and support our clubs, services, products, and entertainment. 10. The U.S. government is bankrupt. The Federal Reserve prints money, i.e. quantitative easing. It also burns money, i.e. quantitative tightening. The U.S. dollar hasn't been backed by gold since Richard Nixon in 1971. The government operates off the full faith of its citizens to pay debt and taxes. American descendants of slavery no longer have faith in the United States government. This is why financial support will be altered, stopped, and redirected. 11. Teach your kids 1 hour a day about their history on this land. Subsection A. Have them learn about a black inventor. Subsection B. Have them know about our heroes. Subsection C. They should know the European that conquered the estate you live in. Subsection D. They should know the nation of people prior to the European invasion militarily and culturally. 12. Practicing these steps will educate us on the land we're claiming, America, and attaches us to the U.S. and laws of the United States government. Every estate American descendants of slavery live in should have steps 1, 2, and 3 advertised via social media, radio, and newspaper. This in 13 weeks, one fiscal quarter, will bring us together for our common cause. So here we are in week 7. We are in the month of November, and we all know there is a very big holiday at the end of this month. And as we awaken and as we close out this 400-year milestone, we clearly understand that that holiday has absolutely nothing to do with us spending our money, nor us participating in the Holocaust of the Native Americans on this land. Maroon historical points. Point 1. Their black skin made them easy targets to identify, so black became a badge of bondage. Point 2. Were maroon or breaking the law? Point 3. Outlaw slave colonies were called maroon colonies. Point 4. Maroon leaders were first and foremost military officers. Point 5. The Maroons paid a small agricultural tax to be used for common defense. So tonight we're going to continue the history of the Black Seminoles and the Maroon Nation and those American descendants of slavery. And as we talked about the Trail of Tears, how those black Native Americans, whether they were from the Seminole Nation, the Maroon Nation, or whether they were just American descendants of slavery, aka runaways from the legal construct of slavery that was being established on the East Coast. These black Native Americans now find themselves heading south from Arkansas and Oklahoma through Texas and into Mexico. Wildcat negotiated for his sovereign nation with President Santa Anna of Mexico. All right, so here we are with our first historical fact. Chief Wildcat negotiates on behalf of the Seminole Nation with the President Santa Anna of Mexico in order to enter into Mexico. Part of that agreement was that the Seminole Nation, in return for Mexican army pay and some farmland for their families. All right, so for the Seminole Nation to go into Mexico, they were going to receive Mexican army pay, and they were going to receive farmland for their families. Seminole and Maroon men served as military colonists along the Rio Grande border. All right, so now you see these same black Seminoles and these same Maroons and these American descendants of slavery as they enter into Mexico, now they're the ones responsible for guarding the Rio Grande border. Black Seminoles and Maroons guarded against the Rio Grande. They had 20 battles. They captured 432 horses and mules. They killed 38 and didn't lose one person. So out of 20 battles, Black Native Americans from the Seminole Nation, the Maroon Nation, and those American descendants of slavery, they didn't lose one person in 20 battles protecting the Rio Grande. Wildcat was also appointed a judge and commissioned colonel. Seminoles wouldn't follow wrong orders, but they were always triumphant. So it says a lot about our lineage and a lot about our history and a lot about our fighting spirit. Not only were we undefeated when it comes to casualties and guarding the Rio Grande, the chief at that time, Wildcat, was appointed a judge and commissioned colonel. And on top of that, Black Native Americans, Black Seminoles, Black American descendants wouldn't follow wrong orders, but they were always triumphant. Maroons from Texas, Black Mexicans, and Indian Territory blacks flocked to the Seminoles in Mexico. So once the word got out that we were in Mexico, look at all the different groups of blacks that started going into Mexico. You had runaways from Texas. You had Black Mexicans. And you had blacks that were leaving what they were calling the Indian Territory, which was basically everything west of the Mississippi River. All different groups of blacks from different nations were now heading into Mexico off the strength of the Seminole Nation and that Maroon Nation. In 1851, the United States outlaw John Rip Ford went into Mexico with 400 men. All right, so in 1851, here we have John Rip Ford. He's going into Mexico in order to seize the Black Seminoles and those Maroons. Wildcat and John Horse drove out these Texas Rangers and unemployed Texans with 60 Seminole fighters. So John Rip Ford went into Mexico 400 deep. We had 60 Seminole fighters and we beat 400 Europeans. In 1856, John Horse and the Seminole Nation refused to take political sides between the ruler of Coahuila and other politicians. So we have Wildcat down in Mexico, and we also got John Horse standing on principle as well, not taking political sides in 1856. Later on in 1856, the United States government declared the Seminoles were not a part of the Creek Nation, but independent. So remember, the Seminole Nation and the Maroon Nation, the reason that they started heading into Mexico was because they were deemed slaves by the United States Attorney General. Now here we are in late 1856. That same nation of people, the United States government declares that they're not a part of the Creek Nation, but they're independent. John Horse became the chief of the Seminole Nation. Wildcats band packed up for Indian Territory. So around the time that John Horse becomes the chief, at the same time, Wildcats band is about to head out of Mexico and go back into what they were calling Indian Territory, which was basically territory west of the Mississippi River, which is what we know in history as frontier land. Wildcat died at age 45. January 1857, Seminoles were hit with smallpox, leaving 50 dead. So here we see that the United States government military decided to poison the black Seminoles by putting red Native Americans left alone. So we can see here again that your skin is your sin and your skin was your bondage. Because if you're black and you happen to be Native American and you're a part of the Seminole Nation, we see where the United States government poisoned them with smallpox in 1857. We also understand that those black Seminoles who had African immunity, they were spared from the smallpox. But at the same time, you got red Native Americans were going out of Mexico and heading back into the frontier land or territory west of the Mississippi. And so you had those Maroons left alone in Mexico. Their greatest accomplishment was preservation of their nation as they moved from country to country. So you can see that the Seminole Nation, which its main headquarters started in Florida, it was able to operate there for hundreds of years along with the Maroon Nation. We understand with the Indian Act removal that Andrew Jackson implemented and made that nation and 4 other nations head west of the Mississippi River, that same nation then landed in Arkansas and Oklahoma. The nations that were already operating and doing business in that area or that territory, they did not want to negotiate with Wildcat in order to partner up to go against the European. So then that same nation of people ended up making a deal with Mexico's president. And in turn, the men joined the army of Mexico and ended up guarding the Rio Grande, defeated, according to military records, 400 Europeans versus 60 black Seminoles. And then here we see the United States government poisons the Seminole Nation with smallpox. And so we start to see different factions of those black Native Americans coming out of Mexico, coming back into territory west of the Mississippi River. This is very important because as you learn what happened to the Maroon Nation and the black Seminole Nation, we start to understand that nothing has changed. Instead of it being smallpox, it was crack cocaine. Or instead of it being smallpox, it was HIV. Instead of it being smallpox, it was mass incarceration. Instead of it being smallpox, it was prescribed medication where the doctor is the dope man via prescription. So we can see that the tactics that the United States government has been using against those with black skin on this land. It hasn't changed. It's just evolved into different names. That's all. It's just evolved into different names. Instead of it being smallpox, they have other chemical warfare weapons that they are continuing to use against our group of people. So what we can learn from the Seminole Nation and the Maroon Nation is the constant warfare that took place on this land. Fighting for freedom. Not liberty, but freedom. I want to get into freedom and liberty real quick. What is freedom? What we know based on history on this land is the Seminole Nation and the Maroon Nation were the last free Black Americans. Why do I say that they were the last free Black Americans? And if you really stop and just think about that for a second, you don't know what it's like to be free. You don't know what it's like to be governed or ruled over by your own people and by your own people's laws. You don't know what that's like. The last time you had that was in the late 1800s. So I got to ask the question again, going back to the Maroon historical points. Were Black Americans, American descendants of slavery, blacks from the Seminole Nation, blacks from the Maroon Nation, those that were escaping slavery, were they breaking the law or seeking freedom? That's a very powerful question in 2019. 400 years later, if you're seeking freedom, are you breaking the law? Then you have to ask yourself the question, whose law would you be breaking in seeking your freedom? You would be breaking the Europeans' law. So who's your God? Who's your God? Because if you look at seeking freedom as breaking the law, because under European law, Black Americans being free is illegal. So if you look at it as if it's illegal, then you don't have a higher power or an architect of the universe that you have your trust and faith in. You have your trust and faith in the European man. Because according to his law, you can never be free. So the more that we learn about our history on this land, the more we have to pay homage. And it's very interesting how people edit this part of our history away from us. They skip over 200 years of wars, 200 years of Black Americans being organized within different nations, the Seminole Nation, the Maroon Nation. Organized warfare, we skip over 200 years of that, and we only focus on those that were in slavery on plantations, and we act as if there were no free Black Americans and that those two nations, the Seminole Nation and the Maroon Nation, didn't exist. I find that very interesting, that we've been miseducated so bad that we only will cite back to the civil rights of the 60s, we'll cite back to the Jim Crow era, and we'll cite back to the plantation era, but we skip right over our own ancestors, our own descendants. We're the descendants of those ancestors that knew freedom on this land, and we don't even talk about them. The Seminole Nation war cry that I play purposefully before every video is a reminder of how miseducated we are, because that's our war song. That's the Black Seminole war song, yet we're so miseducated that we only apply it to a college football team or a Major League Baseball team in the playoffs. We have been completely disconnected from our own history on this land. We don't even realize that that was our war cry. And to add insult to injury, we don't even recognize that Chief Osceola, which is the chief that comes out riding bareback on a horse before every Florida State Seminole game, and when he throws the spear in the ground, we don't realize that that was really a Black American in real life. And that was one of our heroes. So as we're closing out this 400-year milestone, and as we follow the lineage of the Maroon Nation and the Black Seminole Nation, and we start to understand how the Black Americans' story is wrapped tightly around the estate of Georgia and the estate of Florida and the estate of South Carolina. Because those slaves that were escaping, those Black Americans that were escaping the legal construct of slavery from South Carolina were entering into Florida territory. There was no Georgia when Black Americans were escaping the South Carolinas going into Florida. Georgia didn't come till later, but Georgia only came about because the runaways had got out of hand, and so the Europeans had to create a buffer state, i.e. James Oglethorpe. They create a buffer state while still fighting those runaways and Black Americans from the Seminole Nation and Black Native Americans that were coming from other nations that were already on this land. After hundreds of years of war in that Florida territory area, the Black Native Americans on this land were then forced to move west due to the Indian Removal Act. Those Black Native Americans then go into Arkansas and Oklahoma. So we now can connect the dots to how 2 generations later you get a Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. We know now why they could pull off such a feat in Oklahoma, because those same people knew how to run and operate a nation and an army from the territory of Florida. Then those same Black Native Americans go into Mexico. And so here we are now. Those Native Black Americans are about to come out of Mexico and come back into North America. So we can see that you can't talk about the United States government, which is European history on this land. You can't get a full understanding of the United States government's history until you start to learn about the Seminole Wars. Because when you purchase Dr. Claude Anderson's book, The Black History Reader 101 Questions, you start to put the pieces of the puzzle together. all the slave laws that were coming out of the Carolinas and out of the Virginias, and out of Virginia, it was due to the slave laws were being created to try to stop the influence of Black Americans from running away from plantation life. Because there was a whole nother way of living outside of plantation life. It was called freedom. And those free Black Americans had nations and armies and did business and commerce. And so if you ended up being a prisoner of war, or if you ended up being broken mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and you did not try to escape the legal construct of slavery, which was known as plantation lifestyle, well, you were subject to all kind of slave codes. They had to punish those that either got caught, or they had to put the fear of God in those that were born under that system so that they wouldn't try to escape. But it all hinged, all these laws were created from runaways who were joining other Native American nations on this land, and in turn turning around and raiding those same plantations to get their family members back. So the sanitized version of history is you'll put a Harriet Tubman on a pedestal and talk about the Underground Railroad, but you won't talk about the armies that Native American nations on this land had that were in actual war with the European on this land. So as we close out the fiscal year of 2019, we have to get our concepts right and understand we are under military occupation. We are under military occupation. There could be no plantation lifestyle if there was not military conquest on this land first. And some people may say, you tripping. We're not under military occupation. I live in the city of Atlanta. Go to Stone Mountain, Georgia. Pay the money to go to that park. Walk that mountain and look at the 4 faces inscribed on the side of that mountain. And my question to you is, if you're not under military occupation, who are those 4 people inscribed on the mountain of stone? Those are 4 Confederate military officers. Yet you don't believe you're under military occupation, yet there's memorials in every city under the United States government with military officers. If you go to Savannah, you have James Oglethorpe, a military officer. If you go to Augusta, Georgia, you have a military officer. Any city under the United States government, there is a European military officer memorial. And we're running around operating with liberty, not freedom, but liberty under the United States government constructed by the European. And we have forgotten that we are prisoners of war. I want to give a special shout out, as I said that I was going to do for the remainder of the year. And the reason why that's so important, because once you understand that you're a prisoner of war and you're under military occupation, there's no need to argue, debate, or fight with other prisoners of war. If you're an American descendant of slavery, why would I argue with you? Why would I fight against you? You don't have any power. Let's get real for a minute as I get ready to close this out. Why would I waste time fighting an American descendant of slavery when you don't have any power? You are a prisoner of war. You are under military occupation. I would rather spend my time, money, and energy fighting the legal construct, what we like to loosely refer to as the system. I'd rather put my energy on using and fighting the system versus fighting a prisoner of war. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your name is. You have no power as a prisoner of war. You're under military occupation. You're in last place. We are in last place under this society. Why am I wasting time fighting you? What am I gaining by beating up another prisoner of war? We're inmates under the United States government. We don't have a treaty. Is it strange to you that Native Americans that still operate under nations, whether it be the Cherokee Nation, the Choctaw Nation, the Chickasaw Nation, is it strange to you, the Creek Nation? Is it strange to you that those Native Americans have treaties and they don't pay taxes to the United States government because they're not a part of the government, because they still have their freedom to an extent? But yet the one group of people who don't even have human rights, they have civil rights. We don't have human rights, we have civil rights. And yet, even with that reality, our ancestors have paid taxes under a government that they couldn't even participate in, whether it was politically or whether it was from an education standpoint or a commerce standpoint. There was 100 years where your ancestors were paying taxes under an estate and they couldn't go to that estate school. Once you understand your history, your politics clean right on up. The only thing you need to do once you get your history mentally correct in your mind, the only thing you have to do then is look at how they constructed their system and start to construct your own. The idea that we're going to operate up under a system that has us as prisoners, that if we're going to operate under a system that has us classified as prisoners of war under military occupation, that's insane. The same government that stripped you down from your language, your belief system, your traditions, stole your land, stole your money. That same legal construct, you're going to fight to be a part of it when it robbed you of everything. That's insanity. But that's where we are right now, because we have lost the ability as a group to free think and think outside the box and create our own. So understanding that, then the only thing you can do is help this current system that has done your ancestors and you outrageous amounts of damage. Why not help it fall so it can be reconstructed? If 13% of the population under the United States government pulled out and stop spending money on major holidays in the Europeans' religion, i.e. nonprofit organizations, and the native black sellout organizations, we would get attention in a heartbeat. 3 months, 13 weeks is the equivalent of 90 days. When they tell you you got 90-day probation on the job, they just put you on a 13-week forecast calendar. If we didn't spend money on European holidays for 90 days, stop putting money in the collection plate to give money to man, not God. Stop supporting these sellout black organizations that are not advocating for your freedom or your liberty. Things would change. So in closing, shout out to Dr. William Katz, Dr. Barashango, Dr. Claude Anderson, Dr. Umar Johnson, Professor Black Truth, Tone Talks, Yvette Carnell, The Black Authority, Tariq Nasheed, Taj Tariq Bey, Jordan Maxwell, and Gene Keating. All of those people have YouTube channels that you can click on necessary videos and enlighten yourself. Once again, the books that I always would want to recommend. First and foremost, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. Do you understand American Descendant of Slavery, Native American Black? There would be no Black History Month if it wasn't for Dr. Carter G. Woodson. The next book would be Dr. Barashango, Afro-Americans and European Holidays, A Mental Genocide. Dr. Claude Anderson, The Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Black Labor, White Wealth, Dirty Little Secrets 1 and 2. And a host of YouTube videos. Dr. William Katz and his historical work, starting with the book The Black Indians. So as we pick up this Seminole Nation story and this Maroon Nation story, which all ties into the American Descendant of Slavery story, when we pick up next week, we're going to come back out of Mexico and we're coming back into North America. And notice the timeline. Notice the timeline where we are right now in history. We're in the late 1850s. Pay attention to that. The Civil War ended in 1865. We're in the late 1850s right now. So you can already start to see how vital the Black American was to the United States government's history. Because while the Black Seminole and the Black Maroons were going into Mexico, you still had Native blacks in Oklahoma, Native blacks in Seminole and Black Seminoles in Arkansas. You still had Native Black Seminoles and Black Maroons and American Descendants of Slavery in the territory of Florida. We didn't completely leave all these different places that the military was sending us or where we were eluding the United States military. So we can see how we were all over North America. And then you add in the inventions that we are creating to live the life that we know today. And it's very clear to see that without the Black American, there would be no United States government. Once we wake up to the reality that we're under military occupation and that we're prisoners of war, and we get to a point where we're taking no more shorts, that's when the game changes. We are the guys.